Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to have a short discussion on the renal excretory system. I know that most of the students find this particular topic to be a bit difficult, but it can be really interesting and easy if you understand a few fundamental concepts and learn how to correlate them. So I'm hoping that by the end of this lecture, you too will agree with my point of view and actually enjoy and completely comprehend and learn this topic. It's gonna be fun, guys, trust me. Kidneys are wonderful organs and functionally not only help in excretion but also in plasma volume regulation, electrolyte balance, and secrete some hormones, etc. Kidneys are a pair of bean shaped organs located behind the peritoneum on the posterior abdominal wall, and each kidney weighs about 150 grams. And when you cut the kidney in a vertical section, you take the kidney and you cut it along its vertical axis, you'll see that it consists of two regions: an outer cortex, which is darkly staining, and an inner pale shaped medulla, which are pyramid shaped. Here in this diagram, we can see the renal medulla, the renal papilla, the renal cortex. We can see the hilum, which is very important. You should know about the hilum and the structures like the renal artery, the renal vein, the renal artery, the branch of the abdominal aorta, etc. etc. This is like your basic anatomy, but it's important to know to understand the function of the kidneys completely. So, the renal blood supply. The kidneys normally receive about 22% of the cardiac output. So, what is cardiac output? Cardiac output is the amount of blood that your heart pumps out per minute. Okay, so now this blood will be used to supply all the organs of the body. And on an average, it is about 5 liters to 6 liters per minute. And out of this entire amount, okay, 22% is specifically going to go to the kidneys. Okay, so this actually, when you compare it with other organs, is a lot of blood. Okay, it's a lot of blood supply, like more than what is needed for its normal metabolic needs, metabolic functions, okay. And why, what is the importance of this? Because it has to, the kidneys have a special function, and that function is filtration of the blood. So you need that blood, you need that blood flow, you need that lots and lots of blood flowing through the kidney so that it can efficiently filter out stuff. So the renal artery, a branch of the abdominal aorta, enters the kidney through the hilum, okay, and then it progressively branches out and gives out, branches called the interlobar arteries, the arcuate arteries, interlobular arteries, afferent arterioles, etc., etc., and ultimately forms the glomerular capillaries. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidney, okay. So each kidney contains about 1,000,000 nephrons, and the parts of a nephron are the renal corpuscle and the renal tubule. The renal corpuscle is also called the Malpighian body. So the first part, the renal corpuscle, it consists of two parts, of which the Bowman's capsule is the first. So the Bowman's capsule, the structure is very important, and not only from an MCQ point of view, but also like when you need to like perfectly understand how the kidneys function and how exactly urine is formed. It's very important to know the structure of the Bowman's capsule. Okay, so it's a double walled cup shaped structure. So imagine a cup, okay, and inside that cup you're going to place a glomerular ball, okay, and that ball is like the capillaries. So now we're only talking about the Bowman's capsule, okay. So come back to the cup. So this cup has two layers, an inner layer and an outer layer. The inner layer is called the visceral layer, and the outer layer is called the parietal layer. You can keep this in mind because this is like a general rule when you study biology, because like many structures have coverings, and the coverings are most of the times divided into an inner layer and outer layer, and the inner layer is always called the visceral layer and the outer layer is always called the parietal layer. Inner layer or the visceral layer has epithelial cells that are specialized. They are specialized because they perform a special function. And what is that function? It is filtration. Okay, so these epithelial cells are called podocytes, and they form slit like foot processes. They have slit-like foot processes because they form slits between each other. They interdigitate, their foot processes interdigitate, and between them a slit is formed. Okay, now what is the urinary space? The urinary space is basically just the space between the outer layer and the inner layer. Okay, the space where all the urine or the filtrate is going to get collected. Afferent arteriole enters, branches, forms the glomerular capillaries, and they again reunite to form the efferent arteriole. The efferent arteriole again branches out and forms another set of capillaries called the peritubular capillaries. And in this instance, the kidney is very unique because it has two capillary beds. Like normally we have like artery, capillaries and veins, but here we have like two capillary beds. Okay, and also note that the afferent arteriole has a larger diameter than the efferent arteriole, and this is so that the hydrostatic pressure inside the glomerulus will be maintained and will be high. We'll talk more about that later. And of course these capillaries are fenestrated, and obviously they're fenestrated because they perform the function of filtration. And fenestrations basically means holes or pores, so then stuff can easily pass out. It's basically highly permeable. Okay, now talking about the renal tubule, it is made up of the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, which is again divided into the thin descending limb. There's actually like a small thin ascending part which I didn't add, but it's there. And then there's like the thick ascending limb, and also the distal convoluted tubule. The types of nephrons. There are two types of nephrons, cortical nephrons and juxtamedullary nephrons. So first let's look at the cortical nephrons. It forms about 70 to 80% of the nephrons are cortical nephrons. They have short loops of Henle and they don't go deep into the medulla. They majorly lie in the cortex. So a major part of this type of nephron lies in the cortex of the kidney. The efferent arteriole branches to form the peritubular capillaries. The juxtamedullary nephrons on the other side form 20 to 30% of all the nephrons in your kidneys. But these are very special, very important nephrons. These are the most important nephrons and you need to know about them. They have long loops of Henle that move deep into the medulla. The efferent arteriole branches to form specialized network of capillaries called vasa recta. Since these nephrons themselves are special, so obviously they will have specialized capillaries called the vasa recta. Their loops of Henle move very deep into the medulla, almost reaching the pelvic tip. This is just a diagram representing the cortical nephrons and the juxtamedullary nephrons. You can see the tip below, that's your renal papillae. So you can see that the loop of Henle is almost reaching the tip or the pelvic tip. Now the main meat of this video, urine formation. So urine formation occurs as a result of three processes: glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption and tubular secretion. First, let's take a look at glomerular filtration. Glomerular filtration has three main players: the glomerular hydrostatic pressure, glomerular colloid osmotic pressure, and the Bowman's capsule hydrostatic pressure. Now, before we talk about these different types of pressures, because I know that many people get confused between them and what role they play. So let's understand the basic concept behind these terms, so you'll never forget it. So what is hydrostatic pressure? Hydrostatic pressure is the pressure created by the blood flowing in any artery, okay, or any blood vessel for that matter of fact. So this hydrostatic pressure is always an outward pressure. It's always a positive pressure. An outward pressure and a positive pressure is the same. It always has the net tendency of pushing stuff out. So if it's a hydrostatic pressure, it wants to push stuff out. So in this case, it wants to push stuff out of your glomerulus. So this is a good pressure because it is helping us do the function which is required, perform the function required. The next one is the glomerular colloid osmotic pressure. Now this, if you studied blood, you know that the blood contains plasma and plasma proteins. Now these plasma proteins are very big in size, so they don't filter out of the blood and they are responsible for maintaining the volume of the blood. Okay, so when the plasma proteins are present in high concentration or in the appropriate concentration, your blood volume is normal. So what is, like, if you studied osmosis, it's colloid osmotic pressure. So you know that any high solute concentration will tend to pull water inside. Okay, like water moves from, the gradient and all. So this colloid osmotic pressure is a negative force, a negative pressure. A negative pressure because it's a suction pressure. You can think of it as a suction pressure. It pulls stuff inwards, and this is an opposing force to the hydrostatic pressure, which is an outward force, because this is not allowing the fluid from the glomerular capillaries leak out. It's a suction pressure. It is holding the fluid together, holding the fluid inside, and opposing the filtration pressure. The next pressure we are going to talk about is the Bowman's capsule hydrostatic pressure. Now this pressure again is a hydrostatic pressure, and like I spoke previously, a hydrostatic pressure is a positive pressure, a outward pushing pressure. But now imagine, let's come back to that analogy I gave you before of a cup and a ball. So the Bowman's capsule is your cup. So, and inside that is your glomerular capillaries, which forms which is a ball sitting inside the cup. So now, because stuff is filtered inside the Bowman's capsule, it's obviously going to have fluid. It's going to have a certain amount of pressure because it contains fluid or filtrate. So this pressure is basically hydrostatic pressure because it has no proteins, because as I mentioned before, plasma proteins don't get filtered, so the fluid inside the Bowman's capsule is devoid of protein, so it does not have negative pressure. The only pressure it has is positive pressure. But if you take a look at the way it's positioned or the way it's placed, this outward pressure pushes stuff outward from the Bowman's capsule, but actually it's opposing the glomerulus kept inside of it. It's pushing the fluid in the glomerulus to stay inside, basically opposing the hydrostatic pressure. This is just a diagram that I made so that you can better understand what I'm talking about. So as you can see, the GHP, the glomerular hydrostatic pressure, is a pressure which is pushing outwards, so basically helping us in filtration, whereas the glomerular colloid osmotic pressure and the Bowman's hydrostatic pressure are opposing pressures. They're not allowing net filtration happen. Net filtration come into the Bowman's, net movement of fluid into the Bowman's capsule. It is obstructing that. The net filtration pressure obviously now can be understood is going to be your glomerular hydrostatic pressure and minus the pressure which is opposing it, which is the Bowman's hydrostatic pressure and the glomerular colloid osmotic pressure. So the glomerular hydrostatic pressure is normally about 60 millimeters of mercury, whereas you can see the other values. So the net filtration pressure is 10 millimeters of mercury. This is the effective pressure that helps push fluid out and helps in filtration. Okay, and the ultrafiltration rate is about 125 ml per minute. The proximal convoluted tubule and the descending limb of the loop of Henle are freely water permeable, while the thin part of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle and the thick part of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle are water impermeable, whereas the rest, that is the distal convoluted tubule, the collecting tubule, the collecting ducts, are all dependent on ADH. Their water permeability is dependent on ADH, and we will correlate this in a short while. Urine concentration and dilution. Let's look at the requirements for urine concentration first. They are high ADH levels and a high osmolarity of the renal medulla. We will discuss about ADH later. Let us first understand the importance of the medullary interstitial hypertonicity, which is created by the countercurrent multiplier mechanism. So firstly, what is osmolarity? Osmolarity basically is the concentration of a solution. So more solutes in a solution means it's going to be more hypertonic. It's going to be hypertonic as compared to hypotonic. So now the kidney is divided into the cortex and the medulla, and the osmolarity progressively increases as we move downwards towards the medulla, from about 300 milliosmoles per liter in the cortex to 1200 milliosmoles per liter in the medulla, which basically means that the amount of solutes is increasing relative to the water content in the interstitium as we move towards the medulla. So there is more and more solutes are present in the medulla compared to the water. So the formation of this gradient, we have to keep in mind first the permeability of the tubules and the main, that's like the star player, the active transporter, which pumps out sodium, potassium and chloride out. It's also called as the sodium potassium chloride transporter. The vasa recta has a role in the maintenance of this concentration gradient, since without the vasa recta there would be a dissipation of this medullary of the gradient due to passive diffusion and osmosis. To clearly understand how the counter current multiplier mechanism works and how this gradient in the kidney from the cortex to the medulla is established, let us first assume that there is no gradient, no variation at all. So our blood or our plasma has an osmolarity of about 300 milliosmoles per liter. And so naturally all the interstitium will equilibrate with this, and everything will have, even the kidney will have a osmolarity of 300 milliosmoles per liter, the kidney interstitium. So supposing fluid enters, the filtrate enters the PCT and now is flowing down. Once it enters the thick limb of the loop of Henle, it will remain 300 till there. Once it enters the thick ascending limb of the loop of Henle, there is a special transporter called the sodium potassium chloride co-transporter, which actively pumps out solutes outside into the interstitium. Since it pumps out actively, it does not need a concentration gradient. Rather, it will create now. See, since it has pumped solutes out, it has increased the it has increased the osmolarity, it has increased the solute concentration, increased the osmolarity of the renal medullary interstitium. So now when the fluid will flow again, now new filtrate will come from the Bowman's capsule into the PCT and the descending limb. When it reaches the descending limb of the loop of Henle, note the permeability of the tubules. Really important to keep this in mind when we are understanding this topic. So as we know that the descending limb of the loop of Henle is very permeable to water but is impermeable to solutes. So it will rapidly lose out water because the interstitium outside is hypertonic, so it will lose out water, and whatever the solution is there or the inside the tubules, that solution will become concentrated because water has gone out, so relatively the solution inside has become concentrated. And again, now this concentrated fluid will move, like suppose now from 300 milliosmoles per liter, the interstitium has become 400 milliosmoles per liter. So when the new filtrate flows, again it will equilibrate and it will become 400 milliosmoles per liter. So now this fluid again will flow up to the thick ascending loop of Henle, where our special transporter again will pump out more solutes. So now from that hypertonic solution, they will pump out more solutes outside. So like this, this will continue again and again. This process continues again and again, and more solutes is pumped out into the renal medullary interstitium until the medullary interstitial osmolarity reaches about 1200 milliosmoles per liter. So now there is a concentration gradient created from the cortex, where your plasma, again your new filtrate will enter, and there it will be like about 300 milliosmoles per liter, to down where the loop of Henle is present and where the concentration is really high, the solutes are really high, so it is about 1200 milliosmoles per liter down. So now we have a concentration gradient created, but this concentration gradient would be rapidly dissipated if there was no vasa recta. So the vasa recta and its special anatomy, which just like the loop of Henle is a U-turn. So because it has a U-turn, it constantly exchanges solutes in and out. Like whatever solutes comes in on one side is again sent out on the other side, and the blood flows really slowly in the vasa recta. It's a specialized capillary system. So it is very good for exchanging stuffs. So whatever comes in through one side, like it's a loop, so whatever comes in through the descending side will go out again through the ascending side. So the concentration gradient is maintained. If it would be straight, then whatever goes in would like directly drain into the venules. Now also note that their water, actually the thick ascending loop of Henle is water impermeable, while the DCT collecting ducts, collecting tubules, they depend on ADH. Their water permeability depends upon ADH. So when the fluid after it throws out solutes, the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle, the fluid inside the tubule is going to become hypotonic because you're throwing out solutes. And also remember that now the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle is not water permeable, so it can throw solutes out, but it cannot throw water out to make up for that loss, so it cannot equilibrate. So again it's going to become diluted because there's more water and less solute inside the thick ascending limb of the loop of Henle and moving towards the DCT. So it gets, again the urine becomes hypotonic. So at the tip of the loop of Henle, okay, down it is, the urine is hypertonic. Now again as it moves up it becomes hypotonic. Now depending upon the needs of the body, what is the situation in the body, the urine will be either concentrated or diluted. And how does this mechanism happen? Because as we know, the last part, that is the collecting ducts, the collecting tubules, etc., they are dependent upon ADH for water reabsorption. So supposing our body has lost a lot of water, or you're dehydrated, or there's blood loss or something, so you've lost water, so there's a high concentration of solutes, your plasma osmolarity has gone high. Now when this hyper concentrated plasma or blood reaches the hypothalamus and the pituitary to release, there is a feedback system. So now the posterior pituitary will release ADH hormone, which will go and act on the tubules and reabsorb the water so that the body has enough water and the osmolarity of the plasma is maintained normally, which is about 300 milliosmoles per liter. So it will go and act on the collecting duct, the distal convoluted tubule, etc., and it will make it water permeable. On the other hand, the opposite happens if there is excess water in the body and the water needs to get rid of it and the body needs to get rid of it. So then they will not secrete enough amounts of ADH. The body will reduce the secretions of ADH. So then again there will be no water reabsorption. So the large amounts of diluted urine will be formed and will be excreted. So in that way we are flushing out the excess water from the body outside. Again, talking about the role of ADH, I hope you understood it well when I explained it previously, but it's a hormone released by the posterior pituitary. It acts on the distal tubule, collecting duct, and water reabsorption. The water reabsorption of these tubules are dependent on ADH. ADH also activates urea transporters UTA1, UT and UTA3. When urea transporters are activated, urea moves out into the medullary interstitium and it also helps to form the hypertonicity of the medulla. I think around 50 to 60% of the medullary interstitium hypertonicity is formed by urea. So if you have good levels of the hormone ADH in your body or high levels, then your renal medullary interstitium will be properly hypertonic. So fun fact, people who are non-vegetarians and eat a lot of proteins, they have a lot of urea and other nitrogenous waste substances in their body. So because they have more urea, when ADH is secreted, they can be transported out into the medullary interstitium more. And so there is some proof or research showing that people who eat non-vegetarian food or high concentration of proteins, they have better concentrated urine as compared to the vegetarians. So that's the end of our topic, but I know that most of you all are preparing for competitive exams or are just like in med school in general, and if you need some help with discipline and time management, or just like a positive message of encouragement on how to like have hope and be optimistic and have a strong will to push past failures and obstacles, then please check out my book. It has a lot of tips emerging from my own personal experience and talks about like difficulties I faced personally in my journey. So I hope that it can help someone else who may be in my place today. So yeah, please check out my book. and share it with your friends and others who you think may be most in need of it. The link is down in the description box below. And I hope you guys enjoyed the lecture as much as I did. If you have any doubts, please write them down in the comment section below. I would be glad to reply to that. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.